2005 in Africa, 2006 in Africa, 2007 in Africa. International organizations. African Union. The first summit of heads of state of the African Union's Peace and Security Council was held in Libreville on 10 and the 11th of January, 2005. The summit focused on the situation in Côte d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of the Congo and Darfur. The African Union Summit was held on 30 and 31 January in Abuja. The orders of the day included food security, the struggle against pandemics such as HIV/AIDS, malaria, and polio, as well as the new Partnership for Africa's Development and the resolution of conflicts on the continent, especially in Côte d'Ivoire and Darfur. Several decisions were made during the summit. The establishment in Somalia of a peace force of 5,000 to 7,000 troops to assist in the stabilization of the country. It will be organized by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development that joins Somalia and its neighboring countries. In the first stage, its mandate will be limited to protecting the installation of the Somalian government, the deployment of a military force to disarm the Rwandan rebels, who are accused of being implicated in the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, and have since then sought refuge in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Kofi Annan, Secretary-General of the UN, has sought to strengthen the partnership between the UN and the African Union for Africa to reach the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. He declared that Africa isn't on schedule to reach the Millennium Development Goals, but it will be able to reach these goals if the World Partnership, promised a long time ago, does come together completely. The question of how to represent Africa in the best possible way in the UN Security Council was delayed, following a disagreement among the member countries of the African Union. This was referred to a committee composed of 15 countries to assemble in Swaziland from February 2005. The mandate of the current chairman, Olusegun Obasanjo, president of Nigeria, was prolonged from July 2005 to January 2006. Next summits will be held in Libya in July 2005 and in Sudan in January 2006. The Executive Council of the African Union, meeting on 7 and 8 March 2005 in Addis Ababa, decided to propose that Africa is represented by 2 permanent members of the Security Council of the UN. These representatives will need to have the same rights as the other council members, notably the veto power. A summit of the African Union was held in Sirte on 4 and 5 July 2005. The African heads of states requested the GH to totally cancel the debt of all African countries, and demanded that the continent is represented by 2 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Economic Community of West African States. On 19 January 2005, Tanja Mamadou, President of Niger, was elected President of the Economic Community of West African States, replacing John Kufuor of Ghana. February 2005, the ECOWAS condemned the seizure of power by Faure Gnassingbé Eyadéma in Togo following the death of his father Gnassingbé Eyadéma. Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa. The summit of the heads of state of the Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa was held on the 11th of February 2005 in Libreville. Present were the presidents of the Central African Republic, of the Republic of the Congo, of Equatorial Guinea, of Chad, of Gabon, and Abdou Diouf, Secretary-General of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. Paul Biya, President of Cameroon, was represented by the Chairman of the National Assembly. The summit mainly discussed economic aspects, notably the creation of the sub-regional airway company RCE Acute MAC in partnership with the group Royal Air Maroc. The summit also touched the situation in Togo and welcomed a delegation, led by Koko Utazan, Minister of Foreign Affairs. A statement was made, inviting the international community to encourage the Togo authorities to do its utmost to establish a swift and peaceful return of the peace process in the country. Omar Bongo Ondimba, present chairman of the CEMAC, yielded his chair to Teodoro Obiang Nguema, President of Equatorial Guinea. West African Economic and Monetary Union Tanja Mamadou, President of Niger, returned to the chair of the UEMOA following the summit of the organization in Niamey on 30 March 2005. Different heads of state participated in the summit: Abdoulaye Wade, Mathieu Kérékou, Blaise Compaoré, Amadou Toumani Touré, Enrique Rosa and Tanja Mamadou. Togo was represented by Kofi Sama, Prime Minister, and Côte d'Ivoire by Théodore Meligi, Minister for Regional Integration and the African Union. In a final communiqué, the UEMOA congratulated itself for the results on price stability in the Union, following a better provisioning of the food markets, and welcomed the actions intended to preserve the value of the common currency, the CFA franc. Other organizations: A Youth Forum for Peace and Development was held from the 10 to the 12th of January 2005 in Conakry, organized by the UNDP in collaboration with the Economic Community of West African States. It joined about 50 youngsters from Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone, representatives of students' associations, executives of national youth organizations, as well as young people from the rural zones and the border areas of these four countries. These young people committed themselves to contribute to the consolidation of peace and the development of the West African sub-region, to promote the role of the young people in the process of peace and development in Côte d'Ivoire and within the Union of the Mano River. The evaluation meeting of the process of Bamako, bearing on the institutions and democratic practice in the French-speaking countries, was organized in Dakar on 4 and 5 January 2005 by the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie in partnership with the Haut Commissariat aux Droits de l'Homme et la Promotion de la Paix of Senegal, UN. Benin, non-permanent member of the Security Council since the 23rd of October 2003, will be chaired during the month of February 2005. ACP countries, European Union. The 9th session of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly was held from the 18th to the 22nd of April 2005 in Bamako. During this session, the countries of the South requested the European Union to take concrete measures against poverty. In a declaration entitled Declaration of Bamako on the Millennium Development Goals, they ask for the cancellation of debts, measures aiming at laying down more equitable commercial rules, a more real partnership and an increase in the financial flow towards the developing countries. In parallel, the ACP countries must fight effectively against corruption, improve management of public expenditure, and reinforce the social measures, in particular regarding health and education. Conflict and civil war. Côte d'Ivoire. On the 11th of January, Thabo Mbeki, President of South Africa on a mission for the African Union, went to Yamoussoukro, political capital of Côte d'Ivoire, to attend the Council of Ministers. The Ministers of Forces Nouvelles did not attend this council. According to Agence France Presse, their absence was interpreted to be a sign of dissatisfaction with the conclusions of the summit, which granted President Laurent Gbagbo the right to organize a referendum to seek adoption of the revision of Article 35 of the Constitution on the Conditions for eligibility for the presidency of the Republic. On the 22nd of January, the United Nations operation in Côte d'Ivoire authorized the Côte d'Ivoire government to repair its air fleet, destroyed on the 6th of November 2004 by the French soldiers of the Operation Unicorn, without the possibility to rearm them. Guillaume Soro, Secretary-General of the Forces Nouvelles, considers this to be a serious act within the peace process. On the 23rd of January, during a press conference in Bouaké, he declared, "To be able to disarm, one needs an environment of confidence. One does not disarm in distrust, and even less when challenged." South African President Thabo Mbeki received on the 23rd of January in Pretoria a number of representatives of the opposition to discuss the peace process. Alassane Dramane Ouattara, candidate for the Rassemblement des Républicains, and Lambert Kouassi Konan, Vice President of the Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire, were welcomed first before Guillaume Soro, leader of the rebel forces Nouvelles. Alassane Dramane Ouattara assured his wish that the presidential elections, planned for October 2005, would be organized by the United Nations for them to be undisputed by anyone. The Security Council of the United Nations on the 1st of February unanimously adopted a resolution, presented by France, reinforcing the effectiveness of the arms embargo. Resolution 1584 authorized the Blue Helmets of the United Nations operation in Côte d'Ivoire and French soldiers of the Operation Unicorn to inspect without notice planes and freight vehicles using the ports, airports, airfields, military bases and border posts. Pascal Affi-Guessan, chair of the Front Populaire Ivoirien, the party of President Laurent Gbagbo, stated to be surprised and disappointed by this measure, which he describes as unnecessary provocation. The Secretary-General of the United Nations indicates, in a report of the 24th of March 2005 on the situation in Côte d'Ivoire, that, in spite of the commendable efforts that President Mbeki undertook in the name of the African Union and of the encouraging prospects which opens the action plan of the African Union, the country remains actually divided. He worries about the economic decline of the country, of the ongoing violations of human rights, of the non-disarmament of the militia members and the fighters of the Forces Nouvelles. Fearing a serious confrontation in the country, he declares, there is a real danger of the situation becoming uncontrollable, which may lead to unforeseeable consequences for the Côte d'Ivoire population and for the sub-region as a whole. Four political parties of the opposition, the Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire, the Rassemblement des Républicains, the Union for Democracy and Peace in Côte d'Ivoire and the Mouvement des Forces d'Avenir, in a joint declaration, asked the Security Council of UNO with insistence for the renewal of the mandate of the Operation Unicorn and its stay in Côte d'Ivoire until the end of the electoral process, supporting the UN forces. They expressed the support for the mediation started by Thabo Mbeki, President of South Africa, and requested the Forces Nouvelles to participate in the peace process. In a report published on the 31st of March 2005, the human rights organization Human Rights Watch states that several hundreds of recently demobilized Liberian soldiers, among whom many children under 18 inches, were recruited by the Côte d'Ivoire government since the beginning of the civil war. Thabo Mbeki, President of South Africa and mediator for the African Union for the Civil War in Côte d'Ivoire, assembled on 4 and 5 April in Pretoria the different protagonists of the conflict. President Laurent Gbagbo, Prime Minister Seydou Diarra, Guillaume Soro, Alassane Ouattara, Henry Konan B. Acute. An agreement to end the hostilities was reached which envisages the disarmament of the rebel forces and the different pro-government militia. The question about eligibility for the presidency of the Republic could not be resolved. Thabo Mbeki has given himself 1 week to make proposals, after having consulted Olusegun Obasanjo, President of Nigeria and of the African Union, and Kofi Annan, Secretary-General of the UNO. The presidential election remains scheduled for October 2005. Laurent Gbagbo was pleased with this agreement, as was the African Union, whose Commission President Alpha Oumar Konaré congratulated the mediation by Thabo Mbeki. Guillaume Soro announced the imminent return to the government of the Forces Nouvelles ministers. Democratic Republic of the Congo. On the 10th of January, the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, meeting in Libreville, decided in favor of assistance to Kinshasa for the disarmament of the old genocide forces, moved to the Democratic Republic of the Congo since 1994. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees announced on the 17th of January that at least 15,000 Congolese took refuge in Uganda since the 11th of January, fleeing the insecurity reigning in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The 25th of January, release of the report on the Democratic Republic of the Congo by the group of experts formed according to Resolution 1552 of the UN Security Council, MONUC, mission of the United Nations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo announced on the 2nd of February that the 9,000 inhabitants of the area of Tchat in Ituri are under protection of the UN after disturbances that caused 52 deaths the days before. Ituri. The mission of the United Nations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo announced Wednesday the 9th of February that the prosecutor of Bunia in Ituri started legal proceedings after the attacks allotted to the militia members of the Nationalists and Integrationists Front in the area of Tchat since the 19th of January. These attacks caused 52 deaths, mainly women, children and elderly people. Since the 29th of January, more than 10,000 people sought the protection of the UN in Tchat in Ituri, an area with interethnic violence that caused 50,000 deaths since 1999. A group of 4,000 militia members of the forces Armée Acutes du Peuple Congolais decided to depose arms and to adhere to the National Disarmament, Demobilization and Reintegration Program. The militia members who disarm have the choice between being integrated in the regular army or to join the civil life. In a report published on the 7th of March 2005, the organization Human Rights Watch announces the fact that less than 12 attackers were prosecuted, whereas tens of thousands of women and young girls were violated since 1998 by the soldiers and the militia members in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The United Nations Security Council unanimously adopted on the 30th of March 2005 Resolution 1592, by which it extends, until the 1st of October 2005, the mandate of the mission of the United Nations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It reaffirms its concern for the hostilities that the armed groups and militia continue to maintain in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in particular in the provinces of North and South Kivu and in the district of Ituri, and requests the government to bring to justice the persons responsible for the serious violations of human rights and of the international humanitarian law. It considers that the presence of elements of the former Rwandan armed forces and the Interahamwe remains a threat on the local civil populations, and an obstacle for the good neighborship relations between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and invites the African Union to cooperate with the MONUC. Sudan. South Sudan. A final agreement of peace in South Sudan was signed on the 9th of January 2005 in Nairobi between the Sudanese Vice President Ali Osman, Taha and John Garang, leader of the southern rebels of the Sudan People's Liberation Army, putting a term to the longest conflict in Africa that killed 1.5 million during a 6-year period. This agreement envisages broad autonomy for the south of Sudan, which will have its own government and an autonomous army. At the end of this period, a self-determination referendum will be organized. The income resulting from oil will be shared in equal share between the South and North. In addition, the government will have 70% of the positions in the central administration against 30% for the southern rebels. Lastly, the Sharia will be into force only in the north of the country, with Muslim majority. It will not be applied in the south, having a Christian and animist majority. On the 10th of January, thousands of Sudanese expressed their joy in the streets of Khartoum. The National Liberation Council of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement ratified unanimously on the 24th of January the peace agreement in Rumbek. The Security Council of the UN unanimously adopted Resolution 1590 on the 24th of March, presented by the United States, which envisages the sending of a United Nations mission in Sudan made up of 10,000 soldiers and 715 civil police officers in order to support the implementation of the peace agreement in South Sudan, signed in January 2005 by the government and the Sudan People's Liberation Movement Army of John Garang. This mission has an initial mandate of 6 months. At the donor conference, which took place 11 and 12 of April in Oslo, the financial sponsors promised to give $4.5 billion for the reconstruction of Sudan, devastated by 21 years of civil war. John Garang, leader of the former rebels in South Sudan, became vice president of Sudan on the 9th of July in accordance with the peace agreement of January 2005. After the death of John Garang on the 30th of July 2005, he was replaced by Salva Kiir Mayardit on the 11th of August 2005. Darfur. The African Union decided to deploy a peacekeeping force in Darfur. The force should in the long term be made up of 3.320 men. On the 26th of January, an air raid took place on a village in Darfur, killing 100 people. Adam Thiam, spokesman of the African Union, declared that it was the most serious attack performed these last months. It is more than a very serious violation of the ceasefire because it is not an isolated act. The acts of violence multiply these last weeks, a few days from the summit of the African Union, which will be devoted in particular to the situation in Darfur. Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the UN, invited the United Nations on the 1st of February to take urgent action to put an end to the massacres in the area of Darfur in the south of Sudan. In a report submitted the day before, UNO accuses the Sudanese government and the Arab militia to have committed in Darfur serious violations of the international law, equivalent to war crimes or crimes against humanity, referring to the generalized practice of torture, rape, murder and plundering of civilians. On the 13th of February 2005, Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations, called upon NATO and the European Union to seriously study what they can undertake concretely to help to put an end to the tragedy that is the war in Darfur, causing during the last 2 years the death of several tens of thousands and the displacement of 1.6 million. In a conference at the Agence France Presse on the 14th of March 2005, Jan Egeland, United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, stated that the conflict in Darfur killed at least 180,000 during the last 18 months, an average of 10,000 deaths per month. These figures count people dying because of deprivations and diseases. The United Nations Security Council adopted on the 29th of March 2005 by 12 votes 4 and 3 abstentions, a resolution presented by the United States, installing sanctions for those recognized guilty of having committed atrocities threatening the peace process. A commission consisting in representatives of the 15 member states of the Security Council will be charged to nominate these persons. The resolution also extends the embargo in arms and forbids the government to carry out offensive military flights over Darfur. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs esteems that this resolution, that it judges unbalanced and inappropriate, does not take in account the government efforts to deal with the questions related with politics, safety and the humanitarian situation in Darfur. The United Nations Security Council adopted on the 30th of March 2005 by 11 votes for and 4 abstentions a resolution allowing to bring the authors of exactions in Darfur before the International Criminal Court. The United States, opposed to the International Criminal Court, stated that these nationals cannot be judged there. Thus, the resolution provides that the citizens responsible now or in the past, or the personnel of a state non-party to the Treaty of Rome on the International Criminal Court, will be subjected to the exclusive jurisdiction of the state for any acts supposedly related to operations in Sudan. The Peace and Security Council of the African Union approved on the 28th of April the reinforcement of its peacekeeping force in Darfur. Its manpower will pass from 2,200 to 7,700 men. Political crisis in Togo. On the 5th of February 2005, President Gnassingbé Eyadéma died after having led Togo for 38 years. According to the constitution, the chairman of the National Assembly should have been acting president until new presidential elections, to be held in 60 days. The army, however, decided to bring to power a son of the late president, Faure Gnassingbé Eyadéma. To endorse the decision of the army, the parliament urgently modified the constitution. The African Union, the ECOWAS, the UN, the European Union condemned what they called a coup d'état and demanded the re-establishment of the constitutional order, in spite of a ban on public demonstrations issued by the government. The principal opposition parties demanded free and pluralist elections and appealed each day for peaceful demonstrations, which gathered several hundreds to a few thousand people. These were dispersed by the police, using tear gas. On the 25th of February, Faure Gnassingbé Eyadéma renounced from the position of President of the Republic, and announced to be standing as a candidate to the presidential elections, to be held on the 24th of April 2005. Abass Bonfo, Vice President of the National Assembly, became acting president. 4 candidates presented themselves at the election of the 24th of April. Faure Gnassingbé Eyadéma, supported by the Rassemblement du Peuple Togolais, Emmanuel Bouba-Kitani, candidate for the coalition of the radical opposition, Harry Olympio, candidate for the Rassemblement pour la Sauté and la Démocratie au Développement, and Nicholas Lawson, a businessman who withdrew his candidature on the 22nd of April. The campaign was held in a climate of violence. The opposition denounced the conditions in which they had to prepare and request a postponement of the election. 2 days before the poll, François Bocot, Minister for the Interior of the temporary government, requested the postponement of the scrutiny. In a press conference, he denounced a suicidal electoral process. He was then forced to resign. The election took place on the 24th of April. It is marked by much violence, resulting in dozens of deaths. The results were proclaimed on the 26th of April. Faure Gnassingbé wins the election with 60.22% of the votes, before Emmanuel Bobakitani with 38.19% and Harry Olympio with 0.55%. After the announcement, there was an outbreak of demonstrations in several cities of the country, denouncing the massive fraud. Clashes between demonstrators and the police occurred, involving hundreds of victims, died or wounded. Thousands of Togolese took refuge in Benin. ECOWAS, the European Union and France recognized the victory of Faure Gnassingbé Eyadema and called for the installation of a government of national unity. This was rejected by the radical opposition, that requested the cancellation of the elections because of the massive fraud. On the 8th of June, Edem Kodho, president of the Convergence Patriotique Pan-Africaine, is appointed Prime Minister. Elections. Burkina Faso incumbent President Blaise Compaoré is re-elected in the 2005 presidential elections on the 13th of November. See also, Politics of Burkina Faso, Burundi. In the communal, National Assembly and Senate elections of 2005 held on the 3rd of June, the National Council for the Defensive Democracy Forces for the Defense of Democracy dominated the communal councillors. National Assembly and Senate. See also, Politics of Burundi. Djibouti, incumbent President Ismail Omar Guelleh won the presidential elections on the 8th of April unopposed. The opposition headed a massive boycott of the elections, alleging that they were undemocratic and rigged. See also, Politics of Djibouti. Ethiopia. In the general elections held on the 15th of May, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front won a majority of 327 out of the 547 total seats in the House of People's Representatives. The opposition claimed that the elections were fraudulent and unfair, sparking a wave of demonstrations in Addis Ababa, which were only stopped with the arrival of the police and military. See also, Politics of Ethiopia. Gabon. Africa's longest-serving ruler, incumbent President Omar Bongo Ondimba garners 79.18% of the vote in the 2005 presidential elections on the 27th of November, winning another 7-year term. See also, Politics of Gabon. Guinea.